Thank you so much, Aaron. So what I'm going to do really quick is just give an overview of what the series has been, where it came from. So this conversation about holding a series of events started a while back when Deb Saxon was still with the CIC. And she reached out to me to ask about this idea of doing something to honor the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, with the knowledge that that is a very fraught history, right? It often is portrayed, albeit kind of uncritically, right, as a celebration, but there was a lot of things that went into that, into the founding of the U.S. that need to be examined more deeply, especially when it comes to the issue of religious liberty. So for our first event, we kind of walked through the history of religious liberty in the United States, looking at some of the documents that preceded 1776, both within indigenous communities, European communities, and then settler colonial communities in places like Virginia and Rhode Island. And if you were there, right, if not, right, this is the Cliff Notes version, it essentially has moved through social movements and court cases, right? So it has been very much a legal question of how do we define religious liberty? And not surprisingly, the Supreme Court, U.S. Congress, and state governments have defined that radically differently depending on what century you're in. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the way religious liberty actually works in terms of real life practice. And we have an excellent panel for that from different faith traditions, from different backgrounds, who will be discussing their own personal thoughts, observations, and work on the question of religious liberty as we look at the U.S. turning 250. So in order to do that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then he will call the panelists up. So Cleet Lab holds a BA in Communication and an MA in Urban Ministry Studies from Martin University, an MAT in Education Administration from Oakland City University, a PhD in Comparative Religion from the American College of Theology, and he has served as Dean and Principal for Public and Private Secondary Schools, started 5 different alternative and charter schools. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army and the Indiana National Guard, and he is an author, public speaker, and frequently leads groups on civil rights history tours. He's a very busy guy. So with that, I'd like to introduce Cleet Ladd.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Good evening. How's everyone today? It's a fine day. This is going to be an exciting evening tonight. We're going to learn some things. We're going to share some things. And I want you to really lay back and listen and learn, because we're sharing. And that's what it's about. It's about sharing. I was principal of a school in Decatur Township where we had students from 34 countries. And we had the Father Hardin, Boniface Hardin, who was the founder of Martin University, would come to visit. And he would greet everyone in their language. Everyone from 34 countries. I try to do it, couldn't do it as well, but I want to do it tonight. So I want to say bonjour to our sister. Can y'all say bonjour to welcome Monica Raphael? And our next panelist.
Customary to shake hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we shake hands. Okay. Our next panelist and guest, we want to say Sat Sri Akal to Sandeep Singh. And our next panelist, Art Canalis. He didn't give me a proper greeting, so I'm going to say, what's up? How you doing, Art? So we're here today to learn and to share and to hear some things, you know, because we're all faithful people. I would say that for sure. So let's get started. Before we go, I would like for you to introduce yourself and share some of your story.
Okay. Art Canalis. I'm a third-generation Mexican-American. I was born in Kansas City, and I moved to Miami, Florida, when I was about, 12. So I just say, or 11, and I say I'm just from Miami. It makes things easier because I moved around a little bit in my childhood. I finished my doctorate degree in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America, and I love D.C. I love the people. I love the city. I love the school there, and my degrees are in well, my doctorate degree is in ministry, but I really focus on what we call pastoral theology. It's kind of practical theology. And my area of expertise is working with youth and young adults. And my secondary area is in pastoral care and counseling. So I'm also a certified Catholic chaplain, but I'm a layman. I'm not part of a religious order or a Catholic priest. So everything I've done has been as a layperson in the church. So I teach courses in youth ministry, people want to be ministers, and children's ministry, and pastoral care and counseling, spiritual direction. So I'm really interested in the pragmatic side of theology, and that's kind of led me to do the research and the work that I do.
Sandeep Singh, good evening, everyone. I am a practicing attorney, so I have a law firm in Fishers. Was born in New Jersey, Carteret, and when I was 6 months, my grandma took me to India, so I stayed there for the first 4 years. And when I was 4.5, I came back to the United States, to New Jersey, and then moved here to Fishers, Indiana, with family in 2007. Went to HSE High School, graduated there, then went to Butler University, which is where I met Professor Saxon. I guest lecture at her class regularly on religion. And during Butler, I was a pre-med, pre-law, so the Indian stereotype is, be a doctor, right? And I always had a passion for law. So in high school, I interned for a law firm, a lawyer by the name of Russ Kate, who's now my boss, my partner at the law firm, and wanted to be a lawyer because of my religion, right? My identity as a Sikh. Sikhism is known for providing a voice for the voiceless, fighting oppression, and I felt like that's my path. But my parents wanted me to be a doctor, so I did biology. So I was a biology, chemistry, political science at Butler University. Did pre-med, pre-law. Was going to do MD, JD program, the medical doctorate and Juris Doctorate. Did an internship with a doctor, saw blood, and I couldn't handle blood. So I abandoned medical school, and I focused on law school, graduated from McKinney School of Law, and been practicing law since 2020. Do criminal defense, personal injury, civil litigation, business litigation, basically general practice. I stay away from divorce and immigration.
Bonjour. Nindue magana juk nimiana kudu kwe indigenous class. Ozawa gnu do down. Peshabi town in Dojipa. Indianapolis, Indiana, Indida. Nisu Medeo. Ojibwe Minwa, Odawa Minwa. Potawatomi, Minwa, Sichungu, Lakota, Anishinaabe, Kwe, Indao, Shaganashi, Moin, Achina. So I introduced myself in my traditional language, and that's something that I was taught to do since I was a very young child. And the power of being able to do that for a Native American person is that, for my ancestors, they were abused, and they weren't allowed to speak the language. And so it's kind of a form of resistance. It's a way to say that, proudly say that I'm still here. And it also is a way to share something of me, but our language is so powerful. And so as saying bonjour is like a handshake with a hug. Nindue Maganaduk is my relatives. You all are my relatives. And Nimiana Kujukwe, that's my name. And that name has such a great meaning beyond just saying Monica Raphael. And that name talks about how my namer, my Day, which is the equivalent to like a godparent, seen me before I was born. And he's seen me on a cloud dancing for the Spirit. And so it's so important for a Native person to share truly who you are. I also said I was a third-degree Midekwe, and a third-degree Midekwe is I walked around the Midewan Lodge 3 times, and I am a woman. And for us, the Midewan is our way to worship, to pray, to seek healing, and to live. And that, so it would be kind of the equivalent of a religion. And, but we don't really call it that. We call it a way of life. It's something that we do every day, 24 hours a day. And then I said I was from Pushback, Michigan. I spent most of my life in northern lower Michigan on the Grand Traverse Band Reservation. And then I said I now live in Indianapolis. I don't know how to say curator in our language, and I don't know if there is a word because we have a very descriptive language. So I'm a curator at the Idleburg Museum of American Indian and Western Art, and I moved here to Indianapolis in September of 2023.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and just jump right in. So before we kind of get started on the big ideas, would each of you describe a moment in your work, your community, or your own life when you felt your faith or spiritual identity was fully seen and respected in public life, or a time when it wasn't?
Want to pass? I'm not sure there was a time that I didn't feel respected in my position as my work as a lay minister in the church or as a theologian at the university publicly. I did feel a little stint of oppression and racism in graduate school by some professors, but by a particular professor. But I didn't. I haven't felt any kind of really oppression or stigma as a professional. I think a time that I've really felt validated in my work is a pretty recent book that I published in 2022 on the work of working with youth and young adults in the LGBTQ community. I was able to publish a book and work with folks and did lots of interviews and went to a lot of places. So after that book came out, in the Catholic world, it's so sometimes that topic's a little taboo or a little sensitive and causes lots of uneasiness to talk about and to write about. So I was one of the first people to bridge that gap, and so I got plenty of good recognition from that. And I got some people who didn't really like what I did either. But that was a really satisfying time for me professionally. Oh, geez, it is ministering to and with LGBTQ youth and young adults.
So, Carteret, New Jersey was about 20 minutes away from New York City after 9/11. My dad used to drive a taxi in New York, so he experienced it growing up. We in New Jersey, it was predominantly African American, Hispanic, Indian students. Then we come here to Fishers, Indiana, and it's the flip, right? It's predominantly white. So definitely, had people say, "Hey, what's that on your head? You have a tomato in your head." on your head. So I faced that, and I had a strong family support, religious support, where I was able to keep true to my value, keep my identity. So, going into college, parents didn't want me to be a lawyer because they were afraid that there was not a person that looked like me in the law field. I became the first first Sikh male that kept his identity that is a lawyer, and that's in private practice. Ever since I've gone through law school, we have 3 or 4 people that are currently in law school that I've mentored. So, my identity professionally, how does that translate? I have a good story, which is, I go into court, I usually try to match my turban to my tie, right? Color coordination. I do a case for a client, and another client is waiting to get their case called up, and they're like, we want to hire you. I like your turban, I like your color coordination. So I get business based on my identity, right? I look different, I stand out. Judges compliment me, judges respect it, they want to know about the Sikh history, what my identity is, and it's easy to pick out, right? If I'm in this room with all of us in a picture, you can point out the person that has the turban, and But while I was at the prosecutor's office, when I started out practicing in 2020, 2019, 2020, during law school also, I was working in a court, in Hamilton County, Superior Court 6, Judge Bardock, great people, great judge. Joshua Coker, he's Jewish, he's now the Hamilton County prosecutor, he was my boss. We were waiting, we did a trial, we were waiting, he was using the restroom, I was just waiting for the jury to return a verdict, and we had a Hamilton County employee that walked past me, and he said, "You effing Muslim, get out of my country." And I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. I mean, I truly do, and I offered to buy him a coffee. I said, "There's a coffee shop. I'm waiting for the jury to return a verdict. I'm an employee of Hamilton County." He was a ground maintenance worker, and I said, "There's a coffee shop across the street. Let's go buy coffee and let's talk about it." Right? I don't think the appropriate response is, "Oh no, I'm not Muslim. I'm Sikh. You got it wrong." I don't want to justify, his hatred towards another faith group. So I wanted to talk about it. Unfortunately, that made him more mad, and security got involved. And he was hoping the security would remove me, but security told him to get out. Right? That's why I became a lawyer. I became the first one in the community to really pursue this field, because I want to be able to provide. I want to educate. The SIC stands for student. You're a student of life. You're always learning, and that's what my goal is, to educate and ensure that all faith groups enjoy that religious freedom.
Ooh. So I've had a lot of experience being in spaces, institutional spaces, where you haven't felt welcomed, and I've had a lot of where I felt very appreciative of where I was, especially at the Idol Jorg. And so I'm an artist. And so I would come to the Idol Jorg as an artist. And I would show my art at the Indian market. That's the end of June every year. And I won many awards. I won the Harrison Idol Jorg Purchase Award twice, the Best of Show, and in jury. And they always made me feel so welcome. And then I came back a year later as artist in residence. And I spent a month here. And they said, "Wow, you'd be perfect for this position." And I said, "Well, I don't think I could move to Indianapolis." And about a year after that, I returned to Indianapolis as a curator. The Idol Jorg, to me, is a special place. because that is where I had my first museum acquisition. So once you realize that as an artist, your work is in museums, it's kind of like you made it. And then coming to be a curator, it was very satisfying because what I consider my relatives are housed in the basement of the Eidelstorch. Over 10,000 items, over 10,000 relatives. And when I say relatives, that means the material culture of my ancestors that holds their DNA. And so coming there was as if I was being reunited with them. It was, I was being someplace that needed me at that time. And then there came a time where I was questioned, well, what qualifies you to be here? And because I don't hold a PhD. Most curators hold PhDs. And, so I responded. That was a time I was very disrespected. I responded, well, I don't discredit that. It just wasn't in my path. But what I do have is over 50 years of lived knowledge of my culture. And not only that, I continue to learn that every day, and I continue to share that with others. And so that was a response. Another time, I was giving a tour and was disrespected by a docent that, oh no, that's not what that is. And was, whoa, you have 100 people listening to your tour, and then a non-native docent tries to tell the native curator that that's not what that is. And I kept my cool, but I was very disrespected. But there's been so many beautiful things, and probably the most beautiful, where I felt totally respected by this institution, was this past September. I released a book called In the Company of Our Relatives. It's on the Richard Port Jr. collection, and it is a collection of essays on the material culture. And in releasing that book, in the closed hall, the big hall that has weddings and banquets, dinners, we had full-on Medewan ceremonies to celebrate the release of the book and to feast the entire collection. And so being allowed to do that in a space that we don't know how our relatives ended up there was probably the most satisfying event, at the museum.
Okay, this question is for Attorney Singh. Criminal defense work puts you in rooms where people are their most vulnerable. When a client's religious identity is part of their case, whether it's a source of protection or a source of prejudice, what does that look like? And how do you advocate for someone whose faith the system does not understand?
Okay, wow. There are counties in Indiana where we have to be mindful of not taking the case to a jury, right? Because when you're in that county, you're being tried by a jury of your peers. So I would do intel to see if the judge would give a fair shake. I mean, every judge should, it's the law, but unfortunately some juries don't, based on prejudice. So one way is to see what county I am in for that specific client. In terms of, there's actually it's interesting that you asked that question because just last month, I had a case, it's not a serious case. My guy was speeding. He was engaged in a speed contest, so it's not like it's a murder or a very serious crime. And the officer rightfully gave him a summons arrest, which means that he did not have to be arrested and taken to the jail and processed. But that meant that he had to come to court on a date with his attorney. So he hired me, and I appeared in court with him. And, we had the hearing. Yeah, we plead not guilty. That's just the standard stuff. And judge said he needs to get fingerprinted because he wasn't processed. Not a problem. My guy's a U.S. citizen, was not concerned at all. He's actually a law student that I mentor. And he looks like me. In fact, very similar to me. He keeps his beard, does not cut his hair, is a observant, orthodoxic, wears his turban. So we go down to the basement, right? And we go to the person that does the fingerprinting, and she does the fingerprints. Nothing. There's no arrest warrant, nothing out. And she said, "We need to take your photograph. Take off your turban," which it took me by surprise. And I said, when you say take off your turban, you just mean he needs to see the eyelids, right? He can lift his turban, that's no problem, right? And she goes, no. She's like, it has to come off completely. And I said, that's not going to happen, right? I mean, I'm sorry. I've been practicing, and I have clients that do get arrested, and they don't have to take off the entire turban. So I said, okay, you know what, ma'am? I'm not trying to be, hard or disrespectful or anything. It's your policy. Let's get the manager here. Manager comes over. We talk, and ultimately I proposed that, okay, he can take the turban off, but there's a base underneath. You can see there's a base right here because you're not supposed to show your hair in public. Nope. Hair has to come down. And I said, so I go back. I go to the judge. I go, ma'am, and she's like, you have 5 minutes. We don't have time for you. It's 3:30. We have to go. I was like, first of all, court closes at 4:30, so you have about an hour more. And let me go talk to the judge. So I go upstairs and I get an exception. Right? There has to be accommodations for, even though, in this case, it's just speed contest, a C misdemeanor, B misdemeanor, the lowest level offense in the state of Indiana. And, he's being asked to get rid of his religious identity, right? It's a sacred, turban's a sacred part. Okay, we can accommodate the system. We will take the turban off, but the hair needs to remain covered. Okay, so that was just one example where, I was taken aback as a lawyer. I've never had that request. I had to go visit a client who was in jail for murder, right? I went to the DOC. The security guard there told me to take my turban off because he had to do a checking. Right, and I said, no, that's not how it works, sir. Like, I explained the system, speak to the manager, same routine, and manager said, well, we can accommodate you by going into the bathroom, and you can, take it off in front of the security guard and then tie it back up. Like, no, that's not how it works. So ultimately, because I was a lawyer, I was able to explain the case law. I was able to explain why this is a violation. They let me in, but I wrote to the governor after to make sure that this policy was addressed. So, I mean, God willing, that's, whenever my brothers or sisters from the Muslim faith, right, the sisters have to go in with the hijab, hopefully they're not subject to this type of behavior. I haven't heard anything come after that. The governor's office responded, acknowledged, apologized, and made sure that there was going to be policies. I offered myself available for training, that if we need to train IDOC staff, we can do that. But hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, it did. I have had some similar experiences with some of my students. The next question is for Dr. Art Canales. You hold two commitments: that the culture often treats a contradictory deep Catholic faith and outspoken advocacy for LGBTQ youth. You have made that your life's work. How did you arrive at that place where those two things belong together for you?
That's a great question. I kind of stumbled into the work, I'd say. I wasn't trained, and as a layperson, I went to seminary with all guys who were priests and religious sisters, and I went to school in the '90s, graduate school in the '90s. So this wasn't even a topic of theological conversation back then. So it wasn't even on my radar. I have an older brother who's a gay man, and so he's been kind of always been, how should I put this nicely, is quick to put me in my place over the years when I've gotten out of line. So I owe him a great deal of gratitude. But it's like 2015. I started at Marian University in 2012. I just finished another project, and I said, I have to find something to work on or research. I just was working on something for a few years. That's done, and I don't know what to do. And he goes, well, why don't you write about LGBTQ youth or gay youth? I'm like, yeah, right. And he goes, I'm serious. I go, wow, I never thought of that. I go, let me think about it, because I'll stick my neck out if I do this, And so I did, thought about it, prayed about it. And so I said, there's nothing written on, particularly with youth and young adults in my work, some beautiful documents that the U.S. bishops put out and some other organizations put out in the Catholic world, but nothing particular about this. So I started researching and writing and meeting with people and just opening myself up to lots of literature and the social sciences. And along the way, I think, I published a couple articles, and I remember speaking somewhere, and a young woman stood up and said, you're an LGBTQ ally. I'm like, I am? And I didn't know that. And so she goes, of course, you're doing this work. And then I was at a conference speaking in Amsterdam a couple years later, and the moderator who's listened to the papers and asking questions, they said, you're a liberation theologian. I said, I am? They go, yeah. You work with youth, you work with minorities, you work with different populations. You're an advocate for women. I said, okay. So that kind of opened me up to this kind of work. And so as a pastoral theologian, I kind of am able to see, I'm interested in theology, and that's kind of what got me in the field, but I'm interested in people's brokenness and where people are hurting. And when students have come to me over the years, my office saying, oh, I think I'm gay, or I want to transition, my first instinct isn't to say, have you read the Catholic Catechism, right? Or no one comes into my office having a particular question on Christology or the Trinity or anything like that. It's always kind of at where they're hurting. And so I try to meet people there, and that's what's kind of drove me, right? I love my faith. I don't buy into hook, line, and sinker everything, and that's not the purpose of this dialogue. But I also love people, and I've gotten to know plenty of gay and lesbian folks over the years. I love my older brother very much. I have priest friends and bishops that I know are gay in the Catholic Church that I'm friends with. So it's allowed me to look at things not just from the ivory tower, but meet people where they are. And so I think I'm trying to make pastoral practice not miss the theology a little bit, trying to make them come together and dialogue a little bit more. And so that's what's allowed me to stay in the Catholic Church, still love most of the dynamics of the Catholic Church, but also allows me to freely and openly write and research an area like this and make pretty significant headway.
Thank you very much. This next question is for Monica. You are a Anishinaabe Lakota artist. You spent 25 years working directly in tribal communities before becoming a curator. That's a significant shift. From the inside of a community to a major institution in the city, What do you carry from that work into the Idle George? And what does Indianapolis need to understand about what it means to have you there at the Idle George?
That's a kind of a hard question. But okay, so yeah, so for over 25 years, I worked with tribal communities, and I worked with youth. I worked with the so I looked at problems within our community, and they were quite sad. There was, and so I decided to do that, looking at the data. And so I gathered data, and all across Indian country, people will say, oh, there's this problem, there's a meth problem, there's an underage drinking problem, there's a domestic violence problem, there's, just the list goes on and on. And, but that problem might necessarily not be in that community. And so I gathered the data, and there were some visually things that were very wrong that just showed. And so our data showed that we had a horribly high underage drinking rate that resulted in death and tragic deaths and multiple deaths on weekends, car accidents, ODs. And then that data also showed that our youth were not graduating from high school on time, meaning that they would eventually graduate, but they wouldn't graduate within 4 years. And there was a direct correlation to those problems. And so I was very privileged to have been raised by two very beautiful people. My mom and dad, who were both raised by awesome people and very faithful people. And I had a privileged life. I knew my culture. I knew who I was. I knew where I came from. And I knew how to practice that culture, and I knew how to believe in a higher power and to pray in our traditional ways. But I also was raised with great respect for how my grandmothers and grandfathers were raised in the Catholic Church and the Methodist Church. And so what I looked at my community, and I could see that my community was broken. Ooh, I didn't think this would happen. But, and so I looked at our youth, and I could see that they were broken. And I thought that if they knew who they were and where they came from, that they would be less likely to use drugs and alcohol and more likely to graduate high school on time. And so over the course of longer than 25 years, I continued to collect data, and I got a lot of really big federal grants and to change that community, to change my community. And it worked. We have attorneys out of those cohorts. We have doctors. We have cultural directors. We have people who can speak the language. Many of those youth that came through that program are now parents, parents of young people that that have embraced our culture and truly live by that. Sadly, though, that work got too hard. You know, after 30 years of doing that work, it got hard. And I just couldn't do that work anymore. I eventually went out and did it in other tribes. I went to work in Oklahoma. I worked for the federal government for a little bit on promoting how we did it. And so that work got too hard. And I became a full-time artist and focused on that. And then I had devastating, life-changing events in my own life, and I needed to find something to do. And so as an artist, I would visit museums, and I would to do the research, because the kind of art that I do is very customary, very traditional, but I contemporized it. And so I needed to look at how things were made a very long time ago. And so I would go to museums all over that held our Anishinaabe material culture. And many of these museums were not very kind. They would say, oh, you need to put gloves on. Oh, no, you can't pick that up. And I wanted to see how it was made, right? Well, why can't I pick it up, you know? And it wasn't, they weren't kind places. But at the Idajorg, they were. They were like, oh yeah, you can do, yeah. You don't have to wear gloves unless you want to wear gloves. And this was just as, you know, a citizen, a tribal citizen visiting. And while I was there, I really felt that what I call my relatives were talking to me, you know, that you come take care of us, right? And I really said, when my life changed, what am I going to do? And so I don't want to go back to that behavioral health work. And so I said, I think I want to be a museum curator. And it just kind of fell into place. It just fell into place. But I think, you know, the Idajorg, I in fact told them today. I told the museum president, I told the VP of advancement, and then I told a donor, you know, the Idajorg's lucky to have me. And I told them all that, right? They are very lucky because, you know, when you think about a museum and you think about our material culture in that museum, whether it's Native American culture or, you know, a Hebrew museum, Holocaust museum, you know, whatever, that's somebody else's, right? That's not that museum's, and we don't know how it got there, right? It probably got there for very tragic reasons, you know, and so by me coming to the Idajorg, I'm offering forgiveness to the museum. You know, the staff now had nothing to do with how I got there, but I'm offering that forgiveness, right? And by offering that forgiveness to the Idajorg institution, I'm able to help them change. And so as a Native person, you know, it's important that we offer that forgiveness, right? It's so important because there is 250 years of wrongs, right? And so by offering that forgiveness, we're saying, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know any better, but this is how you can do it in a better way. So that's why they're lucky.
Okay, this is for the group, and kind of quickly, about a minute each. Would you how do you make space for people whose identities, especially youth, whose identities don't match the dominant society?
I'm not sure which of the rabbi said this at the beginning, the minister, but I think it's important to listen to people's stories. And for me, I try to meet people where they are in their life and their current situation, and that's gotten a lot of mileage. I think people want to be heard. They want to be, like you were saying, want to be respected. And for me, that starts with listening. I always tell my students, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so shh, and listen.
So this morning I met with a student. She wants to be a lawyer, and she doesn't know where to go, right? She's my religion, doesn't have the connections because her parents aren't lawyers. They're, blue collar like my parents were. So there's not resources. So for me, I had a helping hand, and I extend that out. Whenever there's people that don't know how they fit within the legal profession, internship, shadow me. I have a hearing tomorrow. You're going to come with me 8 a.m. Let's go. So being present, right, listening to what their struggles are. You might not share those struggles, but at least understand them. And I had a helping hand, so I owe it forward. So.
Definitely listening. Number one, listening, right? Always being available, especially to our youth. You can see in their eyes, right? You can see in their eyes if they, that they need you, right? And always, being kind, right? Being kind. Like if somebody, like something that happens a lot to me at the museum. This is me. I dress like this every day, right? And on my second day of work at the Idlejarg, a little boy about maybe 5, 6 years old said, "Ah," and gasped and said, "Are you a real Indian?" And his mom was so mortified. She was just like, "Oh no, I'm so sorry," right? And I knelt down and I said, "Yes, I am. And what's your name, And I made his day. He'll probably remember that forever, right? So it's about connecting. It's about listening. It's about being kind.
This question is for the group as well. Is there a community or a tradition outside of your own that you look to for inspiration or how to preserve identity in your practice under pressure?
For me, it's a kind of silent meditation. I just try to say a few words over in my head. If I'm feeling anxious or pressured or stressed, and I try to center myself. And it's not really, if it is anything, it's from the ancient East religions, not from Christianity. It's just kind of centering myself and breathing and taking my time. And so that's a practice that works well for me.
At my law firm, the senior partner, he's Orthodox, he's Catholic, and then the junior partner is Protestant, and then there's an of counsel that's Lutheran. So we all eat lunch together every single day, and there's always a discussion about religion. And I listen to Protestant, Lutheran, Catholic, and I share my religion, my identity, and they're all the same. I mean, at the core of all these discussions, you may disagree on some things, but the fundamental, it's be human, be a good person. So I rely, on a lot of the, Will Riley, he's the senior partner. He reads from the Bible, and I can point to the same language in the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which is a Sikh holy book. And we share that identity, and it just reconfirms, right? It doesn't matter what religion you practice, the message is the same.
So I moved here in September 2023. I have never not lived in community. I have always either lived on a Native American reservation in northern Lower Michigan or in Oklahoma, which is like the whole state's like a reservation. There's 39 tribes there. So I've never not lived in community until September of 2023. And that was devastating to me. I was here about 2 weeks, and I was like, whoa, I need some earth. And what did I do? And so I went to Eagle Creek and got some earth. And now what do I do? I need to find community. Almost impossible in Indianapolis. And so I was a single mom. I raised 3 small children, and religion always fascinated me, places of worship. And so when things were hard and I needed a break, I would take my kids over to my mom and dad's and let them watch them. And I would go to different places of faith and sit in the back row, and just kind of weasel my way in there and just listen. Because one of my teachers, Eddie Betten B'nai Ibn, who was the Grand Chief of the Midewan Lodge, always really stressed in our traditional Midewan Sanskrit teachings that all creation stories are true, and that you should take what you want and leave the rest. And so I remembered those times when I would just needed a break back when I was raising young children. And I said, wow, okay, I'm going to do that. And so I went to all these different faith-based places in Indianapolis and just weaseled my way in the back and just joined in. Nobody really, some people would notice me and, would want me to come back, or, missionary type. I said, oh no, I'm just visiting. I would just say, I'm just visiting Indianapolis. That was my line. And so I didn't really find community, but I felt embraced. I felt the hug of the Spirit, right? And that's part of what in our creation story, that, there's only one God, and we all were given different ways to reach and to worship Him. And so that's how that's how it got me to this far. I'm going to be 3 years in September of living here. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'll tell you, this is the hard part, okay? Religious liberty is increasingly being invoked to justify exclusion, the right to refuse service, to deny benefits, to limit access, to preach separation and hate. When faith becomes a legal justification for someone else's harm, how do you respond to that? And how do you respond without throwing faith itself under the bus? Kind of quickly.
I got to be honest, the stuff that I see on the news sometimes and stuff that I'll read on my phone and paper, I get angry. And I have to kind of self-talk my anger down. And I think we're just living in a very difficult time, and a time that some days I don't feel real proud to be an American because of what's going on around the world. And it's difficult. We are so divided on so many issues. And, as a person of faith, I always go back to prayer. I have a ritual of prayer that I do every morning, and I try to read scripture every day. And, my profession allows that. I just go in my office, I open the Bible, and I read. And so I might feel better for a little bit about my own spirituality and what I do, but I also feel that I'm called to social justice, and I have to do some kind of action as well. So I try to raise the consciousness level in my classes about what's going on around the world and what's happening here. I try to point out injustices as much as I can. I try to say, here's what my take is on the Gospels, and here's where other people, and that's probably the topic of the next discussions coming up, or CIC, but where this is not the gospel that I love, this is not the Jesus of Nazareth that I understand. So I try to raise a conscious level within the people that I'm around, including my children.
Well, for a lawyer, I go to the legal doctrines, right? I mean, the First Amendment, it's the First Amendment, right? Freedom of religion, and following the First Amendment, right? It's Congress shall make no law, right? It applies to the federal government, and then it ultimately gets incorporated through the 14th Amendment, through case law. So when I, see stuff where there's refusal, like the Masterpiece case, cake shop case, where a baker refused to serve to a gay couple, right? Let's go through the analysis, right? They refused. Under that case, there was a doctrine that was challenged to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, they came out saying that the baker can refuse, right? It's a private community. But then they made it clear that if there's interstate commerce, right? There's the Atlanta City, Georgia hotel case, where basically if a hotel is serving people from other states, right, interstate, they cannot discriminate on the basis of race, religion, gender, sex, the protected classes. So, I do that analysis. I know that's not helpful on a lot of cases. Just every day, like Art mentioned, right, there's, social justice movements where a lawyer can't really come down one way or the other. There has to be a client that has to challenge if they are feeling discriminated, if they believe their religious freedoms are being trampled on. So for me, I go to the Constitution, I go through the legal doctrine, but I have to set my faith aside when I put on the hat of a lawyer, because my oath is to the U.S. Constitution. So there's certain clients that I disagree with, but you have a job to do, and you have to put your personal prejudice aside, that this may not be okay in your faith, in the Sikh faith, this is wrong, but you argue. You have to base it on the legal doctrine, and ultimately I can be at that point in the future where I can say no to cases, but right now as a young attorney, you're kind of stuck where you have to take cases, right? I just became a father. I have a 10-month-old at home, and thank you. Before you know, and this is a sensitive topic, but I took child molest cases, right? I mean, I defended individuals that were accused of doing horrible, horrible things to their children. You know, that has changed. I have my own son, and I don't think I could do it again, right? Russ at my firm, he said the same thing. He's like, you know, you're taking these cases, but there's going to come a point where that's going to change, right? I mean, obviously the Sikh faith punishes individuals that commit those crimes. You're innocent until proven guilty, but even after they're found guilty, or even if they acknowledge their mistake, I still have to go into court and say, Judge, he shouldn't get 30 years, he should get 5 years, right? He's found guilty, he's admitted guilt, he or she has admitted guilt, and I still have to, you know, set aside my own anger, my own faith, which says that this person should not get, right, not be forgiven. But I have to tell the judge, look the judge in the eye and say, Judge, not 30 years. Our system is about rehabilitation, and this person who has committed a heinous crime can rehabilitate and, you know, give him 5 years. So, but after having my son, I haven't had to take a child molest case, and I don't think I can after, so.
So, in my culture, we have something called the 7 grandfathers. So love, wisdom, respect, humility, honesty, truth. And so every morning before I go to work, I go outside and I offer my tobacco. Tobacco was given to us by Creator, God, and it's part of our original creation story, and which we don't have time for. And anyways, I offer my tobacco, and I ask Creator to help me walk in those teachings every day. And because it's a really, really cruel world right now, right? And I need to be able to do that and to remember those teachings. Because when you think about somebody like me, until 1978, it was illegal for me to practice my faith. It was illegal for me to pray in my original way, the Medewan way. It was illegal. I remember that. I'm that old. I started high school in 1978. And so I look at that religious liberty, I look at what's going on today in this country, and without prayer, without faith, I can't make it through the day because I remember all of that in my lifetime. Every chance I get, I do it in a kind way, but I also remind everybody that I can that no one is illegal on stolen land, right? And so, but I do it in a kind way. I don't do it in a militant or, you know, I just remind everybody that every chance I get.
Thank you. When I was in the military, I was a public affairs, and I was in the Mojave Desert, and I met some Mojave Indian, and they took me through a vision quest, and I found my purpose through that vision quest. I discovered who my mentor really was. Has there been a person, a mentor, an elder that helped guide you?
I've had many mentors over my life and at different stages of my life. Probably the most influential was, he's now deceased, as he was a Benedictine priest when I was teaching up at a Franciscan school in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. In a school they've shut down since, it's Silver Lake College. And his name was Jeremiah Cullinane. And we used to go out and eat lunch every Wednesday for 6 or 7 years and had wonderful discussions. He was probably, I was probably in my late 30s at the time, and he was probably in his early 70s. And just a real seat of wisdom, really holy guy, really human, really pastoral, all those things that I was looking for.
Well, growing up, mom, dad, your family, and then that changes when you become a professional. I have partners, Will Riley, Russ Kate, both have taken me under their wing, mentored me in the law. But in the faith side, it would be, Will Riley also. He's a Catholic. He's the senior partner. I mean, he's, whenever I do have questions or facing a tough time, I go to his house, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. I had an incident where, I was struggling and I needed to go talk to someone. And 7 p.m., he's like, come on over. I'm having dinner with my wife. And I had dinner together, and then we went into his study, and we talked about the Bible. We talked about my own, how I identify as a Sikh, and the struggles, they're related to the legal profession. So, he developed into a mentor, even though he's my boss. And on the religious side, my mom, dad, they're both very religious, but they have and then there's a priest that I went to in New Jersey, and he's also shifted here in Indiana, that I have to, because there's a way that my mom, dad can't make me understand the religion, the Sikh religion, that I have to go to someone that is an expert in Sikh studies. And it's just his way of explaining, right, whether it comes to same-sex marriage, whether it comes to different areas, right, our whole, it has to be there has to be equality. There's equality between men and female, right, in Sikhism, right? Females could own property. Since day one of the religion, they were actually generals in the army. So, when it comes to same-sex marriage, when it comes to those issues, why is there a difference? Why does the Sikh faith not accept? And those are questions that my parents would not be able to answer, that I had to lean for someone that's spiritual and had a deep understanding of the holy book.
Oh, I have many mentors. I'm just really blessed. And I was trying to think of, a story to tell you about one of them. Of course, I had already mentioned Budwewedan Iban Ediben Bene. Yeah. And when you say Iban, that means they've passed. And so he was the author of the Mishomas book. The Mishomas book to the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, is a book, maybe like one book of the Bible. But it's a book. But it's only like maybe is one book. And he was somebody who stood up before in 1978 and heard the sound of the little boy water drum. And that little boy water drum is a drum that is made from a tree trunk, and it is filled with water. It is tied with 7 stones, and that's a reflection of those 7 grandfathers that I talked about. And there's beautiful songs that accompany that little boy water drum. And that little boy water drum is our teacher. And as a Medewan person, you walk around that lodge. One time is your first degree. That's one level. Then you'll walk around again. maybe your second. I've walked around it 3 times. You can get to the 8th degree. I don't know anybody that's ever got that high. Even the Grand Chief Budwewedan Ibun was 5th degree. That's the highest that I know of. And so that little boy water drum is my mentor.
Okay, we've got to wrap up. I did want to ask you, after the Q&A, I'm gonna ask you one more question. But right now, we'd like to have guests, or you have any questions from the audience?